have you here with us today. A long-time friend of Carnegie and of myself. No, but it's absolutely delightful to have you with us today, and to have I thought we'd have a small discussion about where you see Syria going. Perhaps you can say a few words about what is the kind of scenario do you see evolving in Syria over the next perhaps phase? Is Geneva still the, if we want to compare between what's happening in Geneva and what's happening in Astana, is Geneva really the framework that through which things will move? Or is Astana, Astana, each one of them is a different framework, obviously offering a different approach to peace building. What are the pluses and minuses of each one? Can they feed off each other, or will one dominate the other, particularly given that Geneva has had so many challenges since it began?
Right, well, I think ever since the Astana process started, it declared the end for any possibility of victor's peace, i.e. one side winning the war in Syria. So now the only route is of a negotiated settlement, and there's a lot of effort being made trying to coordinate what's going on in Geneva with what's going on in Astana. Now the Astana side is very much focused on security, on small ceasefires on the ground, trying to ensure that both sides, multiple sides, respect the idea of a ceasefire within Syria. And then Geneva has been open to more armed groups, as well as the political opposition from inside and outside Syria, including some opposition that has the agreement of the regime to participate. So the idea remains to try and reach a political settlement that is as inclusive as possible. Now, where are we heading with that? I think most actors involved in the conflict in Syria nowadays accept that the future may see Assad continue in his position, at least through a transitional phase. And that, in my view, will complicate the nature of the state and the nature of the outcome as a result of whatever the agreement, whatever shape it takes, and will affect very much the way reconstruction may take place in the country. So to start with, it will create a weaker state, a state that lacks legitimacy across many vast areas of the country, and roughly half of the population will continue to be unhappy with Assad in place. But it will start to attract some attention from the outside.
You mean the kind of political process, or why is it? Can you explain this a little bit more in terms of why you're seeing how you see us moving forward to this position?
I mean, if Assad remains in office,
yes,
he will have to make big compromises in relation to the immediate circle around him, part of the negotiations. And that would lead to creating some additional opposition for him, but a different type of opposition. At the same time, I think
the kind of opposition that we're seeing emerge today, which he's accepting of.
He's accepting of, but also I think there will be some harder opposition coming, particularly those whose economic interest is going to be threatened by any deal and any end to the war. At the same time, those who have been in opposition to Assad for a long time, I think the majority will find it unacceptable that he stays in power, but they have to accept it. For them it's unacceptable, but that's what the reality is going to look like. They will have to live with it. So that will create protracted tension, unlikely to go anytime soon, and it will reflect its instability on the nature of the state that will emerge.
And can you maybe speak a little bit on what of the Kurdish areas? What can we expect for the Kurdish areas in this kind of a scenario, and their relationship with the central state, if there's going to be, assuming that there will remain a central state with Syria intact within its current borders?
I think at best the Turkish area will have a semi-autonomous arrangement for local government, some of their local resources, maybe the ability to raise revenue within the region and so on, aside from the central state. But I don't think there is an appetite in the region or internationally to entertain the idea of an independent section or total autonomy. The change in the Turkish position for Syria is partly driven by the need of Erdogan to put an end to any aspiration that the Kurds may have. So I think that's it.
Can you elaborate a bit more about this, on this issue specifically, the change in the Turkish position vis-à-vis Syria and its own involvement in Syria?
Well, the change in the Turkish position, I mean, it's been, as you said earlier, kind of building up for some time. But the turning point has been the failed coup, which opened Erdogan's eyes, to the vulnerability of the system as it is, and particularly his regime in Turkey. The real view that the Europeans and the Americans hold towards him and Turkey. He was very, very upset, I think, the way they reacted to the possibility of him moving on, and including some Arab states who reacted happily at the beginning. And see, I think, of the threat that the Kurds could hold for his arrangement within Turkey. And those combined made him take the tough position, although he until now continues to say Assad must go. But in reality, he's going along with everybody else, accepting Assad may stay. And that led him to strike a deal over Halab to start with, and various other parts of Syria.
What of Iran and its role in Syria? How do you see that evolving?
I think Iran's role in Syria, I mean, I don't see an immediate or a close end to it for many reasons, including their extension in Lebanon and their policy towards the Middle East. The fact that they can use Syria as they use Iraq and Yemen to really press the Gulf states and by extension the United States in the direction they wish them to go. So they're not going to bring any end to their involvement. However, I personally think that it is exaggerated when people start talking about them wanting to stay in Syria because of the return on their investment, that there is a lot of good is going to come economically from Syria. I think they have much better opportunities further east, and they have been exploiting it in Central Asia and Kazakhstan in particular, without attempting to spread shares and anything else. They just do trade with these people. So they will probably, and hopefully, the state in Iran will bring under control a lot of its militias that now are really having a free reign in the Arab world. But that very much depends on how Trump would approach them. If Trump starts to exert more and more pressure on Iran, more sanctions, they may go back to using those elements to exert pressure on the United States.
Final question, coming back to the notion that Assad will stay and there will be some sort of a normalization and a kind of a semblance of an agreement that is developing over the next maybe year or 2 years or even the next few months, we're not quite sure yet. There's also been a lot of talk of reconstruction, or there's emerging talk of reconstruction. Perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more on this and how you see this impacting or its relationship with the future, with the future Syrian state, no matter what shape it takes, particularly in a context where, as you said earlier, if Assad stays, then this means that a considerable part of the population will not be, and territory in Syria will not necessarily be happy. And we will continue to see quite a bit of agitation in most likely different pockets in Syria.
I mean, the first factor is going to be financing reconstruction. It's going to be the first challenge for Assad and for the government in general. The estimates range, and it's very difficult to get exact estimate of how much is required, but it's something in the range between 170 billion and above Some people put it at as much as $1 trillion are required in the first 5 to 10 years. Now, Syria has its own resources, and experience has taught us everywhere from elsewhere is that usually the international community contributes maximum 10% of what is required to rebuild any country. However, that 10% is usually in cash, and it is critical, and it's required, and it's in hard currency and so on. And that is what Syria is going to be immediately. Now, the United States have already declared its position, and that is they're not into nation building or building Syria or contributing to its reconstruction, and Trump has had enough of that talk. So it will fall back to the European Union out of self-interest, strategic interest to try and keep the Syrians in Syria, particularly now that their experiment with Turkey has backfired really, and it's unlikely to continue the deal with Turkey to try and act as a buffer zone between them and the Syrian refugees. And I think the Gulf states will, whatever the outcome, any outcome that involves Assad, they will not be happy with it, and that will necessarily mean that they will hold back from serious investments in reconstruction. Now, they may continue, as may the US also, in terms of humanitarian assistance. And this is where the second danger comes, is that willingness to finance humanitarian needs is there. At the same time, there's a whole new sector being created of employment in Syria and around Syria, based on non-governmental organizations, civil society activists who are working in humanitarian assistance. And it is the largest growing employment sector, as is always the case in this context.
Catastrophes, yes.
So bringing the two together will necessarily mean that Syria will be kept on humanitarian relief type, make small reconstruction projects for some time to come. And even the EU will not just give blank checks, because they will want their own accountability systems and assurances which they will not get from the Assad regime on its own. So they will try, I think, to build parallel institutions, agencies, similar to what they did in Afghanistan for some time. All of that combined will contribute to relieving populations within Syria, may contribute positively to the possibilities of return of some refugees, particularly from Jordan and Lebanon, to Syria, but will not make a huge difference. Yeah, this is a different point, we can come back to this if you like, but it will not make a huge difference in terms of generating genuine jobs and bringing Syria back into the economy of the region and the globe. Combined with that, I think the private sector in Syria may...
This is what I want to ask. What of the role of the private sector?
The private sector, I think, traditionally has been strong. It has, over the last few years, been politicized and is taking parts, but those capitalists will come back to want to invest in Syria and to make more money. By definition, they will want to invest in areas that are more secure, more stable. They will want to invest in high return, fast return, coming back. Yeah.
We're seeing a lot more investments, for example, in the coastal areas that are under regime control, like Tartus and other places.
Under the regime and possibly under the opposition, but these are the traditional areas that were already well off before. Exactly. And it will lead to greater marginalization of the very same people that were part of the first uprising. Unfortunately, if this scenario materializes, they will be left out yet again.
Scenarios for return, you were just mentioning, we'll come back to it. So, I mean,
scenarios for return, I think there will be different types. To start with the refugees in Lebanon and Jordan, less so in Turkey, there will be active efforts to try and return them because of the pressures they are causing to the economy within these two states. And I think, by definition, these are the people who have very little, and they have very little choice. Any sign of stability in their hometowns, in their original areas, will be interpreted as the right for return, or the possibility of return. And the international community will be mobilized to try and make that happen. Now within Syria, there are areas that have been practically cleansed, and I think it's unlikely that they are going to be returned. And there are areas that have been cleansed as a result of settling accounts that are 30, 40 years old. Now they've had the opportunity of pushing people out. I don't think they will be wanting them back anytime soon. And that's going to create a second generation of displaced within Syria. But in general, I think those who are educated, who left to Europe, to the United States, to other parts of the world, who started the new opportunities, will probably return as they usually do in not the whole family, but one member of the family will start contact and try to secure their property back home, that they have a land, their deeds, etc. But they're unlikely to return to live permanently in Syria until the circumstances improve a lot.
Considerably.
Yeah.
Sultan, thank you very much. This was wonderful.
You're welcome.
And we look forward to welcoming you again in Beirut and
Thank
in
you so
Carnegie.
much, and thank you for your hospitality. It's great.
Pleasure.